What?
Fatality.
The new Mortal Kombat film is coming out, or is out, depending on when you watch this. And those fatalities from the game is something that I've always wanted to take a swing at in our own way. Plus, it gives us an excuse to bring back blood, like the good old days. So first we decided which of the fatalities we wanted to try our own version of landing on that chain decapitation. And we ended up deciding to shoot outside with the main reason, the blood that Josh has to ultimately spit out of his mouth. We shot at night too, so I opted to shoot close to my wooden fence as that would let us use a minimal amount of lights and still have a good amount of detail. So we tossed up a few lights, mostly my NAND lights, these RGB tubes, which give me a great throw to cover a good amount of area. And since they are RGB, I can have them in any color that I want without needing gel. So I was able to take these few lights and move them around wherever I needed for each of the shots. The only light I didn't move was my Aperture Nova P300, which I had just giving us a little bit of moonlight fill throughout the scene. I also shot this on my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K Pro, which is still my current favorite camera by far. Another thing we did while shooting was to have Emily holding onto a practical chain between her hands to act as a reference for the section she throws at Josh that will be added in post. To add that chain in post, we actually shot a chain separately on green screen, trying to match the same angle and motion for each of the shots, and had it chained up to try and keep that far end as static as possible to then track onto Emily's hand. To add this in, we'll jump into After Effects, create a null object for your hand track, then right-click your footage, track and stabilize, track motion, then choose the area of the hand, then track through. Once that's done, click Edit Target, make sure the null is selected, and then OK. Then Apply and OK. Now, with our chain footage, we will move the anchor point to where it will be attached to Emily's hand, roto around the chain, and feather it a bit. Keyframe and animate the mask throughout the clip if the chain goes out of the mask. To keep out the green, we're going to be using the key light effect and select a green area. Play around with these settings as they can vary depending on your shot. We found it better for this to change from the final result to intermediate. Then add an advanced spill suppressor to remove any remaining green. Now we're going to change the position, rotation, and scale to match, then link to the tracked null. The next main thing needed is to better match the color. And we're just going to do this by eye by using the curves effect to lower the brightness and lift the shadows, then adding a fast blur to knock it out of focus a bit. Since Josh should be in front, we'll duplicate the footage and bring it to the top of the comp and roto around him. This mask will likely need to be keyframed too. For final tweaks, we just manually keyframe the chain rotation to look fixed with Josh. Because we placed the anchor point at the far end, it means we can rotate the scale from this point rather than in the center, for example. For this close-up shot, we have a whip pan background plate and then two separate plates for the chain and the blade on the end, which is actually some gardening tool. Both of these were shot static and with a practical moving light just to give it some life. We went through the same roto and keying process again, as well as lowering the brightness. We also used the liquefy tool and scale to make the blade longer and more pointed. To add a little motion, you can also pre-comp these layers. Then for the position, Alt-click the stopwatch to add a wiggle expression. We went with wiggle, open bracket, 24, 24, close bracket, then enabled motion blur to get this nice camera jitter. Now for Josh getting his head ripped off, we shot it static and then had him fall out of frame so that we could use this area as a clean plate. For this effect, move to the point in the timeline where you want the head to be removed and mask an area of the clean plate over your actor's head and feather it. To mask your actor's shoulder in front of this, you could draw a mask and set it to subtract, but if you want to put something else behind it, like blood, this doesn't help. So it's better to use a duplicate like we did with Josh earlier. So duplicate the footage and bring it to the top of the comp, but this time, instead of drawing a mask onto the layer, we're going to create a new solid. We're going to set the footage layer to alpha matte and draw the mask on the solid. Then create a new null, and we're gonna track the footage just like before, only this time for the neck area, which we will then use for the roto and blood. Once it's tracked and applied to the null, link the solid to the null, and you're gonna see it moves with Josh. The mask will likely still need to be keyframed and tweaked throughout, but it won't need as much as it would if you manually animated without the track. But now the head just suddenly vanishes. So we're gonna wanna duplicate the footage again for the head and freeze frame it. Open bracket moves the layer start position to the point that you are at in the timeline, roto around the head, and move the anchor point to somewhere in the middle. Set a position keyframe 1 frame before, then move forward a few frames and move the head up and out of frame and enable motion blur to get something like this. Next, we're gonna add some blood, but first I wanna thank MusicBed. We've been using MusicBed for years. They really are one of the best places to look for music for any project. Almost every episode of Film Riot is packed full of their music and other projects that we've done too, like our Teddy Bears versus Tank episode. Link to that one below. But for shorts, to sketches, to just general talking head type stuff like this right here, they have pretty much everything that you would need, with over 700 indie artists and composers to choose from. All of their music is record label quality too, so you're getting some of the best out there, including work from artists like Ryan Talbert, who composed for films like Kingsman: The Golden Circle and King Arthur. You can also get unlimited access for your projects when you sign up. So whether you make content from YouTube, are a freelancer, an in-house filmmaker, or somewhere in between, there's really something for everyone here. So definitely check out the links below to find out more about MusicBed. I also have a playlist there with a lot of my favorite tracks, and there's a link in the description for that as well. Jumping right back into blood. First, we use this severed neck 4 asset from Action VFX and move the anchor point to the stump, which if you haven't checked out Action VFX's site, definitely do it. They have a great amount of high quality stuff like this. We wanted the blood to begin as soon as the head is removed, so we moved it in the timeline, then trimmed it to start at this frame. We moved it below the roto layer and linked it to the track null. And once again, we used a curves effect to try to match the footage better. For some extra spray, we also used a water blast asset from Action Essentials 2 and colored it red. For the chain, it was very similar to the previous shots, except this time it was anchored and tracked to Josh rather than Emily. We then keyframed the scale and rotation frame by frame to place the other end of the chain to Emily's hand. And once again, we changed the color to match. For him spitting out the blood, we didn't want to do that digitally because that can often feel very artificial, and it's easy enough just to actually spit out blood. So we made our own fake blood that we've shown how to make on the show before, but it's been a while, like a long while, so we actually had to rewatch our own tutorial on how to make blood. And it's way easier than we even remembered. It's literally just corn syrup, red, green, and yellow food coloring. That's it. Josh had to add some water too to make it more runny so we could actually spit it out, but that was it, and it worked great. And Thompson was then able to add more blood to make it look even a little more violent. Then we had the final shot, which was definitely the most complex. We were going for a stylized kind of vibe like these Mortal Kombat shots and a sort of time ramp into a time freeze. First, we shot this background plate of Emily, which we got by me just sitting on a ladder and holding a tripod as high as I could. Then this green screen shot of Josh with his head turning as if it's being thrown and slowly rotating to act as the camera rotating around him for the final result. And we shot all of that in slow motion to make it as smooth as possible. When we tried a test comp though, it didn't have the right time freeze feeling and the camera rotating around him began a little too late. To fix this, we basically just cut out a chunk of footage so that the head rotate begins right after he turns into his position and rendered this as a new clip. With this in a new comp, we first drew a simple mask around Josh and feathered it, then added a few keyframes as he moved throughout. Then just like before, we used key light set to intermediate result, but without an advanced spill killer this time, as the light to the right has a bit of a green tint on him. We wanted to camera track his rotation, so first pre-comp and select move all attributes to new composition, and at the frame where the rotation begins, split the layer. Right-click, track, stabilize, and track the camera. Once it's tracked, if it was successful, you should see some points fixed to different areas of your actor. Right-click one and create null and camera. Since the shot starts before this frame, expand the camera to the start of the timeline, then move the first 2 keyframes, then easy ease them so that the camera move slowly starts from the beginning. To rotate around the head, we will use the solid matte technique, again this time with the solid as a 3D layer and moved into the right position in 3D space. You can copy the the 3D null position and paste it to the solid to fix it in the right location. Make sure to scale it up enough to fully cover the area you want to roto, then set the footage to alpha matte. Roto around the head and lightly feather. If you have a beardless person, you could just keyframe this mask and move it throughout the timeline because it is affected by the 3D track. A lot of the work is done for us, so you might only need a few keyframes. Because Josh has a beard though, we wanted a more textured edge, so for this we used turbulent displace. Duplicate this solid and move above the first section of the clip and set to alpha matte. This part requires a lot more manual keyframing since his head moves a lot and there is no track to match this part. But afterwards, we have this. With that done, we will render this out with an alpha channel to speed up our comping, copy the camera and null, drop this render into a new comp and paste. We'll also drop in our background plate now and make it 3D, push the position far into the background and scale up until you have some parallax motion with the rotation. To add some more initial speed in the beginning, we decided to split the footage at the point where the rotation starts and change the start of the clip speed to 50. So it's twice as fast, then we move the second layer over to start right after. To bring the head into this close position, link the second layer to the first. Keyframe the first layer scale, then at the start, scale down to make the head far away. Easy ease the last scale keyframe to make it come to a slow stop and enable motion blur. You can also keyframe position and rotation and place the head where you want in the frame. If you want the scale to continue to an even slower stop, you can create a null object and link the first head layer to this. Add keyframes for the null scale and easy ease them. The graph editor lets you choose how gradual you want a keyframe to come to a stop, so something like this will make the scaling gradually slow down. You can even duplicate this null and link the first one to it and stretch the scaling time even further so there's still some subtle scaling throughout. This is all personal preference though, so there aren't any specific values to follow. We were going back and forth for a while until we were happy with the results. The chain was very similar to previous shots, except it was a 3D layer this time and rotated on an angle toward the head and manually keyframed at the start to look like it is attached to the head. Even though a lot of the background will be blocked by the blood, we thought Emily still moving in this time freeze moment didn't feel right, so we right-clicked the background plate and enabled time remapping, added a keyframe where we wanted it to stay regular speed, then a keyframe where you want it to become frozen. Put on an easy ease and delete the last keyframe. Enable frame blending and your footage should come to a stop. For the blood, you could use stock footage as a frozen still and set a 3D layer placed around the head, but the more recent Mortal Kombat graphics have this very solid 3D model looking blood asset, which mainly look like they slowly scaled up. So we decided to use 3D models to closer match this look using Element 3D. We occasionally see comments from people wondering why they can't find the Element plugin, but this is a third-party plugin, so you're gonna wanna get that at videocopilot.net. So to do this, create a solid and apply Element 3D. If you own the Motion Design 2-pack from Video Copilot, they have a folder of these cool 3D fluid models. You can change the diffuse color to red or use a different shader to get a blood look if you have any. You will likely need to alter the world position and scale properties to get the blood in the right placement in your 3D tracked scene. And to match the scale, we will link this layer to the first head layer and enable motion blur. You can change group rotation to play around with different looks, and like always, we use a curves to better match the color. Because we wanted to go full-on Mortal Kombat gore with this shot, we ended up with a combo of fluid models to really fill in the area with the blood. Even though this layer is linked with the scaling head layer, it's likely you will still need to keyframe things like position, scale, and rotation, and you can even keyframe the 3D rotation too to try and closer match the rotation of the head. It's all very shot specific, so there are no set values for this. Just do it by eye and remember to slowly ease the ending keyframe to fit with the time ramp feel. To add some separation, you can add an adjustment layer below the blood with a blur effect and keyframe the amount over the first few frames so that it's as if the head is coming into focus. Lastly, if you want a more dead look, you can go into the original head comp and add a gray 3D solid mask to the eyes with a lowered opacity, then render this out and replace the original render. To finish, we faded this fatality graphic over the screen, and that was the story of Josh's demise.
Fatality.
But that's it. This was definitely a long one, but oh, stop.
Nice.
Stop. But if you aren't subscribed, consider doing so below. And if you do, hit the bell button so you're notified when we put up more goodies. And definitely come back next Thursday. We're going to be diving into the basics of shot types for film. So until then, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.